Well, you're welcome to start, or tell us your favorite thing that you saw at Max.
Yeah, well, I could start out with well, actually, I've got a little bit of Mac stuff in here,
Okay.
so maybe I'll just pick that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm recording this as well. So anything that's sort of strange that I might say, right, is for the benefit of the people who may be watching the recording. I knew there was going to be not a huge turnout tonight, and we kind of went back and forth about, well, should we do it over Connect or whatever. Um, I was here and there with it, so finally, just I think it was yesterday or something. Someone was like, "Well, this is going to be recorded," and I was like, "I could record it." So I'm going to try to record it, and it should be recording now. But yeah.
Where are you recording from?
Oh, just using Camtasia.
So, like the camera on your computer?
No. It's just recording the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. So just simple screen recording and audio. Yeah. No, I haven't set up cameras behind the little.
I was just thinking it was coming through your computer, and it'd be really awkward just watching you look.
Oh yeah, that'd be completely weird, right? But I'm not doing that. So yeah. Thanks for coming out. I haven't spoken for this particular group before, but I've done a lot of the local user groups. I used to do stuff like once or twice a year for the, what were they called, the Rocky Mountain Adobe user group, and I went to some of the Cold Fusion ones and things like that back like probably 10, 12 years ago. Those were a while away, but yeah. So I'm happy to be here and talk about one of my favorite subjects to talk about, which is Flash Professional. And I'm not sure how many in the room are aware that there have been some, pretty significant advances in terms of Flash Professional. It's not so much the kind of abused child in the corner anymore in Adobe's house. It's actually getting some nourishment and so forth. So I want to talk a little bit about that, about some of the new things that are coming up in the next version, the next release of Flash Professional, and just bring some positivity around that and try to get people interested and excited in it again, because it's got some interesting, exciting things going for it. So here's a little bit of information about myself. I work for the University of Denver, down south of Denver, actually. Well, it's still in Denver, but it's a ways down there. I'm talking about Boulder. I also have a small company on the side that I do a lot of consulting with through authorships and projects for different people like Adobe. I did something with the Computer History Museum in California this year, and other smaller projects like that. I'm also an Adobe Education Leader and an Adobe Community Professional. I recently became an Apache Flex committer for the Apache Software Foundation, and I'm an author on lynda.com, Train Simple, Adobe Press, blah, 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 all those places. So, I titled this thing A New Era in Interaction and Animation and so forth, because I really think that this is like the beginning of sort of a new life for Flash Professional. And I don't think I'm the only person that thinks that. The people that I talk to at Adobe, the product managers and people on those groups who oversee this stuff, that is really how they see this, is, this new version of Flash Professional is coming out, and looking into the future, it really is sort of, a rebirth of the application. So going along with that, I've actually seen a lot of recent opportunities myself. I mentioned that I do authorship for lynda.com, Train Simple. I just released a thing on Flash Professional for lynda.com, and previously when I was talking with them about stuff, I always wanted to do Flash stuff for them. They're always like, "Oh yeah, I'm not really interested, thanks," right? And this past year, I brought up a Flash thing again, and they were like, "Oh yeah, let's do that." And I was shocked, but I was also pleased. That's a good sign. Train Simple approached me, and they wanted, some stuff around Flash. So I was like, wow, there's people actually like wanting more stuff around Flash right now, which I found uh, pretty good. In terms of more positivity at Adobe Max, which we were just talking about here, I gave 3 sessions. So I gave a session on Monday, which was mostly full. I gave a lab session on Tuesday, which Myra assisted with, and that was mostly full. It was actually, in terms of registration, sold out, which was amazing, I thought, for a Flash related lab at Max. Seeing, have you all ever been to Max? No. The past couple of years hasn't been a huge, a good opportunity to hear about what's going on with Flash stuff. So it was really nice to see that they wanted things like this. And I've got the full list of labs and sessions here. So there were actually quite a few. And any of the labs are given twice. So there's 2 labs on here. So instead of 8 sessions, we're looking at actually 10 sessions that are dedicated to Flash Professional. On top of that, there were also a couple of sessions done by the guy who does the Snap SVG animator custom target platform. And those had a good amount of Flash Professional content in them as well. In addition to that, I've been working really heavily on this book for Peach Pit. And, it's just one of these other opportunities to see that, publishers are actually getting interested in Flash Professional again. Whether it's video authorships, whether it's writing. I haven't gotten a lot of stuff for articles yet. I used to do a lot of articles for people, but that hasn't quite come yet. But I'm expecting next year there's going to be quite a few additional things coming down the road. And, this isn't only about, of course, stuff that I'm doing, because there's people at Max and in other places that are also excited to, give Flash Professional another look after all this. So they're looking for different opportunities to produce material in support of the application, which is really nice to hear. I mean, people who, used to do this stuff, there were big names in it for a while. And then, as popularity waned, they got disinterested, they went off to do other things. They're interested in Flash Professional again. So, looking at it from the perspective of sort of where we've come from, of course, for a long time, and if we keep this in the frame of Max, Adobe Max, for a good number of years, Adobe Max was pretty much a giant Flash conference with once in a while some InDesign and Photoshop sessions and stuff like that. And there would be, a lot of designers, strictly designers, who were into those programs, and they would complain about it, because it's like, it's Adobe, it's Photoshop, but all you guys ever talk about is Flash, right? So everybody knows April 2010. This was pretty much not what sealed the deal, but what sort of really, really accelerated the decline in popularity of both Flash Professional and the runtimes. And, this is the advice that Jobs closed out his thoughts on Flash with, that perhaps Adobe should focus on creating HTML5 tools, blah, 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 right? So, that happened, and it was a really rough time. If you were focused on Flash stuff, no matter what it is, you're having a hard time finding work in terms of consulting and everything. If you're doing Flash stuff in your normal profession, all of a sudden people are like, well, can't we do that in HTML? And you look at it and you're like, well, hell no, we can't do that in HTML. We have to use Flash for this. And, to this day, there's still a lot of stuff that you do, if it's advanced enough, you really do still have to use some kind of Flash-related technology to do in terms of the runtimes. This is an image that I used in a post on my blog back in 2010, because I've always been sort of, I've tried to have a balanced perspective on everything in terms of Flash and HTML5, and of course native is thrown in there as well. These days, it seems like the big war is between HTML and native, right? You've got people who are like, oh, HTML and these different JavaScript frameworks, they can do stuff that's so close to native that you don't need to do native, and the native people are like, that's crap. I've got my native frameworks that I'm using, and you can't touch that with your HTML. So I'm sure that this sort of thing will be rehashed pretty much throughout eternity as we go ahead and create new technologies, and people feel the need to not just use technology for whatever it's good for, but rather people feel a need to choose and align themselves to something, and technology is not any different than that. So I mean, I've tried to say, Flash and HTML, they've always gotten along great together. I mean, Flash is embedded inside of an HTML web page normally, if you're talking Flash player, and it augments HTML. I mean, that was its primary purpose for the longest time, because you couldn't do vector graphics on the web. So that's where Swift started to become used a lot. And then you get the interactivity, you get the application development, and it just blew up, right? You got video, you got YouTube. Like, YouTube would not exist if it wasn't for a Flash player. So I always try to bring this up that even today, Flash and HTML can be friends, which is very different from what other people have said, that they can't be friends, that you should just go forward with this and be done with it. There's no balance here. It's very one-sided. So that kind of brings us throughout those years from 2010 to today. And there's a new version of Flash Professional coming out, and a lot of people don't even know what's been added in the past year or two, because they have been sort of ramping things up slowly, and with this new release, things are just kind of. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of Flash Professional as a general application are the target platforms, because that is really the really point of contention that most people, when they say bad things about Flash, this is their problem, is that they they have a problem with the Flash platform or the Flash player and so forth. So breaking down target platforms in reach from Flash Professional, I see Flash Professional as sort of this kind of creativity engine where you can build interactivity, assets, animation, all this stuff for multiple purposes. And some of the target platforms reveal what those purposes are. So you've got Flash Player and Air, of course. You've got HD video. So when Flash Professional was rebuilt as a 64-bit modern application back in CC, a lot of people don't even know that it was completely rebuilt from the ground up at that time. But when that happened, it gained a lot of benefits in terms of performance, in terms of how things happen on the stage when you're drawing, but also in terms of its output. So back in the day, Flash Pro used to have this HD, well, not HD, but a video output that was really kind of clumsy. Like, it would skip frames sometimes in the output and everything, and you'd get something that wasn't exactly what you authored at the end. The new HD video output, it really does a frame-by-frame rendering of all the different stuff on the stage. Even if you have code in there, it actually interprets that code. If you're doing programmatic animation through ActionScript, it'll go through and do that. So, I've done things like generated rain across an animation or something, and it's just generated through ActionScript. You output that to video using this new export, and it's perfect. Most people are very excited about the HTML5 aspects of it, though. And again, that brings us back to this. Jobs says, hey, Adobe should be creating HTML5 tools. And, there we are today, and, well, Adobe's not so much creating HTML5 tools, but they're augmenting an already excellent tool set to produce HTML content, which I think is great because it leverages everything that's already existing inside of the program to just target a different platform. So you can target HTML5 Canvas or WebGL. You've also got things like sprite sheets if you're doing any sort of gaming. I did a course on development with Phaser, which is a game development framework for JavaScript. And it can actually use very efficiently sprite sheets generated from Flash Professional. So you can always create assets in Flash Professional for use across other platforms, even platforms that aren't even supported inside of Flash Professional. Then you've got things like custom platforms, which I've got another slide on that in a bit. There's a number of statistics that I like to use before I get into the new features and the HTML capabilities of Flash Professional, and those are around Flash Player, Air, and so forth. We can see here, and these are stats from early September, and these are directly from Adobe. And what's interesting is that it's 1 billion times per month that Flash Player is actually, you know what? I meant to change that. It shouldn't say updated. It should say downloaded. I actually had this at max, this particular slide, and it said updated, and somebody called me out on it. They were like, haha, that's true. And I'm like, So I actually fixed it in those slides, but it's still busted in this slide. But it's downloaded 1.2 billion times a month from Adobe. Now, this is different, of course, from users who are using something like Google Chrome on Linux, on Windows, or on OS X. If you're using Chrome on those three systems, you've actually got Flash Player built into the system, and it updates automatically. So those people never have to go to adobe.com. They never have to download Flash Player. It just downloads automatically. So this 1.2 billion doesn't count any of that. It's the same thing with Chromebooks. It's the same thing with these other browsers you see here, IE 11 and Microsoft Edge. It's all built in, so yeah. Question.
Does that number count the times you have to download it when it updates? Because you have to do updates.
I believe it's just raw downloads. Yeah, so if somebody had to go to adobe.com to update it, like if they were running Firefox, for instance. So Firefox does not have an internal Flash Player. It relies on Adobe's version. So if there was an update, they would have to go off and update it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that a few times where it'll say it'll pop up and say you have to update it, and so you click on the link and it goes to adobe.com download.
Yeah.
So on and so forth.
Yeah, the good thing about that process is it does steadily improve. So, there is the ability right now to actually mark inside of your Flash Player settings that you want it to auto update. And right now it doesn't do like an auto update for like major releases, but like some of those smaller security releases, it does auto update. So there are ways to try and sort of keep that away, but yeah. But I mean, I don't think anybody can argue that these are huge numbers for Flash Player, right? Here's some Adobe Air stats. And does everybody know what Air is? I'm like shocked because like every time I ask that question, there's only like a few people who know what Air is. So what Air is, and I don't have a slide for this. That's okay. I can explain it. What Adobe Air is it's another runtime. So there's actually two Adobe runtimes. And there's an Adobe Runtimes team at Adobe, and they produce both of them. So all sort of together under one roof. And one of them is Flash Player, which is normally embedded web content, right? But of course, Flash Player is also bundled with things like executable projectors. It's used in kiosks, things like that. There's lots of standalone ways you can use it as well. However, Adobe Air is a separate but related runtime. So it's basically all the stuff that Flash Player has, plus a bunch of other stuff that gives you lower level system access to create like really nice, robust, and richly creative applications for Windows, for OS X, for iPad, iPhone. So the stuff you create in Flash Professional in ActionScript and is part of the Flash runtimes can actually run on iPad and iPhone, which people still don't get that. But yeah, Flash Player is not available in the browser on those devices, but you can totally create, an application or a game or something like that. And a ton of the featured apps inside of Apple's curated store are actually built with Adobe Air.
So is that like a workaround?
It's not so much a workaround. It's more like a cross compiler. So you write your stuff inside of, well, you write it in ActionScript or a combination of ActionScript and MXML, which is Flex. And then you use some sort of compiler to compile it into a native iOS application. So Flash Professional can do that, Flash Builder can do that, IntelliJ IDEA can do that, FDT can do that, Flash Develop can do that. There's a bunch of IDEs that can just do that out of the box, but Adobe actually has the SDK and the compiler and all that stuff available for free that anybody can just download, and they can integrate it into their IDE of choice, or even just, if they're really happy just doing command line stuff, they can compile stuff that way too. So it's highly versatile, and it's like this little secret that shouldn't be a little secret, because we've got 4 billion Air application installs. In terms of mobile apps, you've even got a breakdown here between Android and iOS. It's a significant amount of applications and application installs that we're talking about when it comes to Air. And it's not just mobile, it's also desktop as well, so OS X and Windows. So then we get to things like HTML5 Canvas. Canvas is really interesting because it behaves very similarly to Flash Player, in that with Flash Player, you've got your little VM, and it runs in a little box that's embedded inside of your HTML content, right? With HTML5 Canvas, you've also got this little box, except in this case, the little box happens to be an actual DOM element in HTML5. So it's the Canvas element. And what the Canvas element allows you to do is basically change pixels and detect interaction within that box, which at its core is what people have been doing for years with Flash Player, right? And you can see my notes here that, if this is a native thing inside of Flash Professional. A few years ago, they did have like this little add-on, like an extension you could download to output to Canvas. And this is sort of related to that. It's like a grown-up version of that, but it's actually a native format. So what you do is inside of Flash Professional, instead of creating a new ActionScript document for Flash Player, you create a new HTML5 FLA document for Canvas. And I've done a number of things inside of this, both in my kind of regular profession and in my kind of authoring life. And it's really fun to work with. If years ago you were doing stuff in ActionScript 2 and just kind of like fiddling around, and it's not to diminish what you can do in HTML5 Canvas, but it's got that sort of fun factor again, because you can just create something and throw it out there and say, hey, check this out. And since it is HTML5 Canvas, people don't need to have Flash Player, so they can open it up on their Android device or their Apple device, their iOS device or whatever. And important things to note here is that, you actually just use the Actions panel. So any sort of interaction you need to do, any sort of code you need to write, it supports JavaScript directly inside of the Actions panel. So it's not like you're like going off between different IDEs or anything. It's all in the same place, which for a multi-purpose creative application, I think that's really important. It's always been one of the strong points of Flash Professional, is that you can do so much with the one application. And this just it fits right into that kind of workflow. WebGL is very similar in that it also actually uses the Canvas DOM element to render stuff. However, it differs in that it is actually GPU accelerated. So you're dealing with things like shaders and textures and stuff. But you can just draw all of your stuff inside of Flash Pro, or import it from Illustrator and animate it, or make it interactive, or do whatever you want inside of Flash Pro and output it to WebGL. And Flash Professional takes care of all of the translation elements. So you don't have to write your shaders and textures and things like that, right? And this also supports, of course, JavaScript directly in the Actions panel. HD video, I already kind of talked about quite a bit, but it works really well. You just bring it right into Adobe Media Encoder, and then you can tell it, yeah, I want my Flash project to be rendered as an MP4. For YouTube, I want it optimized for Vimeo. I want to bring this straight into Premiere at the highest quality possible so I can integrate it with something else. Or you can bring it into After Effects and do all sorts of stuff with it, right? And then we have custom platforms. And custom platforms is where a lot of the internal work that's been done over the past 2 or 3 years has gone. So the idea behind this is that they've really opened up everything inside of Flash Professional so that if somebody wants to, like if you're a platform developer for whatever, OpenFL, Unity, whatever platform you can think of, right? If you want to be able to have people use Flash Professional to create and output content for your platform, there's a whole SDK that Adobe's made available where you can do that, wrap it up as an extension, and then distribute that to people who are using Flash Professional. So the one that I've used a bit and that I think is really exciting is an SVG plugin. And this is animated SVG. So Flash Professional natively has the ability to output SVG as static SVG, so you can bring it into Illustrator or whatever. However, this is actually animated and interactive SVG. It uses the Snap SVG libraries, which are sort of a descendant of the Raphael libraries that have been used on the web for interactive and animated SVG for a while. So what's new? And I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of the older what's new stuff here, but some of the more important things that you can see. And as you can see, I'm going over the initial CC release, working up to what's new in this upcoming release. So I mentioned before that the whole thing was rewritten at this time. 64-bit architecture, it had the built-in HTML5 canvas publishing, which was okay back then. It's really, really nice now. Like back then, you couldn't write JavaScript inside of there. You had to do like this wonk. It's not worth me talking about it. It wasn't that fun. But yeah, unlimited pasteboard, real-time drawing. So this is like, you draw stuff on the stage and it actually appears as you draw it. Where older versions of Flash Pro, you'd have to like draw it and you'd get like this weird outline first. And then when you stop drawing it, it's like, boop, it pops in like a circle or something, right? So 2014, we saw a variable with strokes. So this is like the beautiful strokes in Adobe Illustrator brought into Flash Professional. We've got a new improved motion editor. So if you're using motion tweens, it pulls up this big graph that you can specifically tween different properties. It's almost like what you see inside of something like After Effects, where you've just got like all these controls for the different properties of your objects. And just about any property you want can be finely eased and tweaked and so forth inside of there. Projectors were brought back. So a lot of people still use projectors for kind of standalone content running on a machine. And projectors are basically, if you're not familiar with them, it's bundling the Flash player and your application together in an executable format. So you can just like run it like a little application. It's like a little standalone thing. It's actually really neat. There was another release in 2014, and this is when custom platforms were introduced. Interactive WebGL, custom brushes. So those strokes using the width tool, you can now save them as custom brushes. Animation guides and Swift import. And then this is the release earlier this year where they reintroduced the Bones tool and inverse kinematics. So if you don't know what IK is, it's a method of animation where you build up an armature. And Flash Professional allows 2 ways of doing this. One, you can actually see in the screenshot here. It's kind of that's a basic shape, right? It's just a rectangle that I drew. And then you just draw these little bone segments in there that are all connected. And then you've got the ability to animate things across these different poses. So you can do it that way. You can also create a bunch of movie clip symbol instances and bind them together. So if you had like an arm, you could have like this be a movie clip symbol, and the hand and the fingers, and you just lay out all the different bones, and it makes animation really, for things like that, character poses, it makes it very simple. Yeah, Canvas spreadsheets, blah, 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 scale brushes. So iOS 64-bit output, this has to do with Adobe Air, because Apple, at the beginning of the year, made a pronouncement that by this particular date, any application submitted to the Apple App Store for iOS needed to be 64-bit. And Adobe was actually the first ones to get a cross-compiler, Air, to fulfill those requirements. And that's inside of Flash Professional now as well. So here's the new stuff. So each one of those other ones, right, I had maybe 6 items in there. So you can see there's definitely more stuff in the upcoming release. So this release isn't actually out yet. My understanding is it's coming soon, but this is the new stuff that's in there. And actually there's so much new stuff that I've got 2 slides for all of it. So I really wasn't kidding when I said that, Adobe really is ramping up development and resources behind Flash Professional. They're getting serious about it, which is awesome to see. So one of the coolest new features, and I'll show this in my demos, is the new paintbrush tool. So this allows you to actually use vector art on strokes. So similar to how you can do inside of Illustrator once again. And the stuff just renders out fine. If you're doing HTML5 canvas, it renders your strokes. If you're targeting Flash Player, if you're doing Air, it doesn't matter. It'll render those strokes. And it also comes with a brush library that's filled with different vector art brushes that you can use right out of the box. The really cool thing, though, is you can actually create your own brushes. So if you're using Adobe Brush CC on your Android device or your iOS device, I don't know, has anybody used that for anything? So you basically can take a photo of something and then mask out parts of it and then tell it how you want the brush to behave and clean it up and things like that. And then it gets saved to your CC library, so your Creative Cloud library. And you're able to bring it into Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever, but you'll be able to bring those into Flash Professional and use them in there to actually draw your artwork. On top of that, this little box I have right here shows the brush editor. So there's actually even more refinements you can do inside of Flash Professional to edit your brushes once they're in there. You've got things like tag swatches, which is kind of like CSS in a way, or kind of like the way symbols work, where you create sort of a particular swatch, color swatch, right, inside of your color mixer. And if you make that and name it a tag swatch, then anything that you apply that swatch to in what you're creating, if you change your mind later on, you can change the tagged swatch and it cascades across everything that is using that tag swatch. So you wouldn't have to go back and reapply a new swatch over and over again to all your different art elements.
Like global swatches in Illustrator.
Oh, does Illustrator have that?
Yeah, global swatches.
I don't know.
When you double click on the swatch and check it, it's right underneath process or spot color.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, they've been taking a lot of stuff from Illustrator and putting it into Flash Pro, so that it's not surprising, though I did not know that. So that's very cool. So this one is pretty big for people who are users of stuff like Muse or Dreamweaver or InDesign or DPS, and that is the native OAM publishing support inside of Flash Pro. So is anybody familiar with OAM? I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically something that it was made popular with Edge Animate. So you'd be able to create this animation or this interactive content, and then you could publish it as just HTML, or you could package it up in this OAM file. And it's basically a little archive, very portable, and Adobe's built support for OAM into a bunch of their products. So I mentioned Muse, InDesign, Dreamweaver. I'm not sure if there's anything else, but those are the big 3. And it's used a lot with stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see that actually be built into Flash Professional. I'd love to see Flash Professional be part of the workflow of people doing stuff with InDesign, for instance. I think that's like really cool. But so hopefully people notice this and use it. Publishing text as outlines in HTML5 Canvas documents. So normally when you're working inside of Canvas, you can only use what's known as dynamic text inside of Flash Professional. So that means that if you're actually using text in a Canvas document, that somebody who is viewing that content would need that particular font. So, anybody who's worked on the web understands this dilemma, right? However, there's been an alternative in the past. You could always break the font apart into just outlines and shapes, and then it works great. However, there's an option that's upcoming where you can actually, when in the publish settings, you can say, I want to publish all my text in this movie as outlines. And then it works just like static text inside of a Flash Player document. Color-coded onion skinning, stage rotation tool. There's like so much stuff. And actually, how much time do we have?
Well, we get library closes at 8, but we're ready to wind down at 7:30.
Sounds cool.
Yeah. I was going to ask on the type. There's no support for typekit though, is there?
No, there's no support for typekit. That's not to say there won't be, but there isn't.
I have a question. This might be a little late, but I've never used Flash before, so a lot of the stuff and terms that you're using mean nothing to me.
Oh, okay.
So could you give a brief explanation on what we would use Flash for? I know I talked to my coworker about this, and she said she was really excited about Flash. She and her husband learned Flash, and then all of a sudden you couldn't use Flash anymore.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like something you could use on websites. And I told her about this, and she's like, "Can you even use Flash online? Like, what's the point in learning this if you can't use it?" So you could get a brief description.
Sure, I mean, in the early days of Flash, what people mostly used it for was animation. Okay. It was either like super unnecessary animated website introductions with like things flying around and audio and just stuff. I mean, at this time, having a GIF image in a web page was like the epitome of creativity, right? And then the Swift format comes along and people just went crazy for it. So stuff like that people used to do. And that evolved into more animation. So people would have animated web series that they would produce and so forth. So it became an entertainment medium. And off of that, as the product evolved, it started including what was first known as actions. And then that developed into ActionScript, which then developed into ActionScript 2, and finally was redeveloped into ActionScript 3. And with each one of those various leaps in the programming platform, you had just this huge amount of both interactive capabilities and people were building full applications that you would normally just see. Like think about something like Google Mail, right? Or Google Drive even, where something like that type of web application on the web, but way before any of that was possible ever, So a lot of that stuff, the term for it way back was RIA, which stood for Rich Internet Application. And the idea was just to make this, super customized application that you could pretty much do whatever with. It was used, of course, for launching things like YouTube. So it adopted these, these video playback capabilities and audio playback capabilities. So for years, it was the only way that you could view video and audio and things like that consistently. So it was heavily, and it still is heavily, heavily used for that sort of stuff. Even something like JW Player. Okay, that's one of the most popular kind of ready-made video playback things that you can use on the web right now. And they just released a new version. It uses both HTML and Flash Player. And something that it does, and this is a great example of why Flash Player is still somewhat necessary. Aside from all the content out there that's been created over the years that if you didn't have Flash Player, you wouldn't be able to use that stuff anymore, right? Besides all the educational content that kids access on their Chromebooks like every single day across the world, if you... I got too excited. What was I going to say? What was your question?
What is Flash? How do you use it? And
right.
Like, based on what
that thought just went away from me.
Today.
Oh yeah, JW Player.
Okay.
So that's a perfect example. Like I said before, like, oh yeah, it's still used today, still necessary today in some cases. So something like video streaming. So there's all sorts of different video streaming protocols. For years, the video streaming protocol that was used for live stream and VOD content was RTMP. And this is something that is used pretty much only with Flash Player. Flash Player was like the only thing people used. So Apple came along and they're like, well, we want to stream video. So we're going to develop our own standard. So they developed this thing called HLS, which actually runs over HTTP, except HLS only works on certain systems. So if you want to have a live stream or a VOD stream or something like that where video or audio is being played, and you want to hit as many targets as possible, you want to use HLS. Because HLS can hit, it'll work natively on iPhone and iPad. It'll work on most modern Android devices somewhat, and it'll work on Safari on OS X. Any other browser, any other desktop operating system, even if you're using like Firefox or Chrome on OS X, you're not going to be able to use HLS unless you use Flash Player. So having something like JW Player, where you've got, and I'm not trying to sell JW Player to anyone, I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever, but I think it's cool what they've done though. So their strategy is like you can point to an HLS stream, and what they've done is, hey, if it can run natively using the video tag in HTML, it'll do that. But if it can't, what it does is it uses this component that they wrote for Flash Player that will make it run through Flash Player, and it will interpret the HLS stream. Because Flash Player doesn't do that natively. They had to build the decoder into their application, which runs on Flash Player. So I hope that gives you some kind of example of the scope is huge. I mean, it's like freaking everywhere. Like for a while, people were like putting it in their toasters and their refrigerators, and Ford had it in their dashboards and everything. I mean, it was a big deal. Yeah, boats. It was some like big yacht that had, For the
computer system.
It was mostly for like navigation systems and user interfaces and things like that. And in film, they still do like a bunch of like UI stuff in using Flash Player and Flash. In major video games, they actually do a ton of UIs, overlays, HUDs, menus, and things like that using Flash. If you think about animated content, so at Adobe Max, they had a bunch of people from different animation studios there who produce things for television to talk about how they use Flash to animate for TV. So apparently a bunch of the shows on Adult Swim are all made in Flash Professional. Also, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, is drawn and animated in Flash Professional. There's like a ton of stuff out there.
What's the difference between using Flash Professional for animation versus like the other Adobe ones?
Like After Effects?
Yes.
So After Effects only deals with video.
Okay.
And really that's kind of how you can think of Flash Professional as different from a lot of these other applications that Adobe has, is all the other ones that do animation pretty much have like this one narrow target, right? So yeah, After Effects, yeah, you can do animation and it's awesome for that. It outputs to video. So you're going to be wanting to use video like in your entire pipeline to do that. Flash Professional can output video, but it's different. You know, it would be a different kind of
aspect of your web page.
Yeah.
Interface.
Like if you were doing something and, you know, I mean, it's perfect for like animated stuff. So if you're like doing this little animation and you output it as Flash Player, yeah, there's going to be a big segment of people who aren't going to be able to see that if it's on the web. People, if looking on their phones, for instance, they're not going to be able to see that. And if you do it for HTML5 Canvas, you know, I mean, phones will run the stuff, but depending upon the phone, depending upon the connection and everything, it might not be the best experience. It might be laggy or whatever. If you do it as a video, as an H.264 encoded video, almost every device on the planet, handheld device, has hardware decoding for MP4. So if you do it for MP4, chances are that thing's going to play back really nice. So, I mean, it's just an example of, you know, you make these little choices about how you want to, you know, where you want to send this stuff. How do you want people to access it? And that's one of the beautiful things about Flash, is that you can just like create stuff in there, and then, you know, if you don't want to do Flash Play, here, convert the stuff over to this or that or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, you can do, and that's one of the things that's cool about it. You can build pretty much whatever you want in it, and you can output in all these different formats now too. So it's nice, yeah.
So just have one more question.
Yeah.
When you say Flash Player, I think of like, I'm trying to watch a video, like stream something online, and it says Flash Player. Like it'll show the logo and it'll start playing the video. Or if I haven't downloaded Flash Player, updated it, it'll say that.
And it tells you need to download Flash Player.
But the way you're talking about it, it sounds more than just a video. Like it may be a button that you click on or hover on might have an animation to it, or like an animation at the bottom that isn't restricted by the canvas. It's just
and Flash Player itself, you know, isn't a video playback mechanism, although it has those capabilities. So Flash Player itself is a virtual machine. It's a runtime. So it just interprets Swift files. So those Swift files could be anything. They could be a video player, right? Stream video. They could be an animation. They could be an interactive thing, like you said, where you click buttons and do things. They could be a financial, e-learning, big.
When you say runtime player, I'm still thinking of the little box of a video playing on the computer. So and when you say animation, I think of that too. So like interpreting animation in the way that you're thinking of it is a little different, because when I think of animation, I'm usually thinking of a cartoon or a video.
It could be those things, you know. You don't. I'm trying to think of the. Or like another approach or another term to use for.
For what the Flash Player is?
Yeah,
different
like
kinds of animations that aren't just videos.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it just allows you. It's just a space, really. I mean, you can, if you're thinking at it from like a project perspective, where like, oh, I want to build something, and I'm going to use Flash Player to run it. You can really just think of Flash Player as like, oh, okay, well, I've got this space, and I can do whatever I want in there. I don't know if that like grossly simplifies it, or.
I'm sure if I try and like use it, I can figure all these things out.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff you can do. Like any of that stuff that I rattled off and that Myra mentioned, it's like any of that stuff. Like banks use it for, they use it to secure their login forms. Banks and credit unions, like a lot of them, if you like right click on it on the input fields, you'll see, oh, that's weird, that's about Flash Player. What the heck, you know? And I mean, it's used like for so many different things. But anyway, yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, so here's some of the other things that it can be used for. And once we get into the demos, maybe we'll see that a little better. No, we're good. We're good. So, yeah, just lots of improvements all around. So I'll blaze through this stuff, because this is stuff that I can kind of show as we go along with the demos. But here's some of the animation tools. This is an attempt to show like how robust this system is, right? So these are the different animation tools you can use here. You can see here, this is the new motion editor that I talked about, where you can, have all these different easing of properties and changes over time, and you get these fine-tuned ability to change them. Inverse kinematics, so this is that bones feature that I mentioned. And here we can see this is a movie clip based armature. So you've got the bones going from his center, which is kind of like where his nose would be there, and then out into his arms, so he can kind of like, waggle his arms back and forth. This is a very simple armature, but it is still an armature. And it's made up of movie clip symbols instead of like in the other screenshot where you just had a rectangle with bones in it. So paintbrushes and vector art brushes. I'm going to show that in the demo for sure, because that's one of the things I'm most excited about. And Creative Cloud libraries. So you're able to access not only your brushes in here, but you can access any of the colors that you've generated from Adobe Color or Adobe Capture, and also any shapes from Adobe Shape or Adobe Capture. So like all the stuff that you've generated using your mobile apps, you can access through the CC Library panel inside of Flash Pro, just like you would in Photoshop, Illustrator, or any of the other apps that support that. And it also has access, you can see way down here, to Adobe Stock, which is Adobe's new stock photography service. So you're able to like click on that and choose something and bring it in, and if you want it, you can purchase it and so forth. So here's an example of the enhanced onion skinning. And the only people who would appreciate probably how neat that is are people who have done onion skinning in the past, because people who haven't are just gonna look at it and say like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. But there's a lot more visual cues to, you can see here, the purple bits up top are frames, his position on frames that come before the current frame, and then the green portions that are kind of below him are where he's going. So this is like future time. So it kind of shows you through this onion skinning effect how that works. You used to be able to do it through outlines, or it would be like ghosted, but this actually like explicitly shows you, all right, purple stuff came before, green stuff is coming up next, and then you've got your fully opaque, normally colored figure on the current frame. It's an animation help, an aid. Then you got stage rotation. So a lot of people are using Flash Pro on Wacom Cintiqs and additional things like that, where you kind of, you're drawing right on the screen with a stylus. So this allows you to actually rotate the stage in different ways to make it more natural to draw. And it doesn't actually change the output. So like if you rotate the stage, it's not going to output like that. Oh, for when you're
using the pen tool to do stuff. It's nice to do it on Photoshop. But then I need to rotate the stroke, and it changes the shape of the stroke when you rotate the thing.
Yeah, no, I have trouble sometimes just doing it. I've just got a normal like Intuos 4 kind of deal, and even that, like sometimes I'm like, yeah, I gotta, twist yourself to get the right position. Yeah, here's what tag swatches look like. Basically, they got like this little triangle down at the bottom to indicate their tag swatch. And let's see some demonstrations. So exit out of there and open up Flash Pro. All right. So again, this is a pre-release version of Flash Pro, so the features it has in here aren't out yet. So if you download Flash Pro, it's not going to have some of the stuff that I'm showing, but soon and all that, it'll be up there. So what you probably would want to do, especially for people who aren't used to Flash Professional, they never used it before, or you're coming back to it after a number of years. Things are a little bit different from how they were in the past anyway. But basically, you've got your recent items here inside of the welcome screen, and then you've got your create new document. These are the two basic things when it comes to welcome screen. There's all this other stuff here, but which of course people can use if they want to. I won't dismiss it as useless, but it takes you off to like Adobe Learn and things like that, where they have resources about Flash Pro and so forth. But you can create new HTML5 canvas document, WebGL, ActionScript, Air for desktop, Android, or iOS, and then a whole bunch of ActionScript and JavaScript derivative files. So if you want to create new classes and interfaces, you can do that. If you want a Flash JavaScript file, which is basically like a way you can create your own kind of commands and stuff like that inside of Flash Pro to do things for you better. There's also, of course, down here, any custom platforms. So this is that Snap SVG animator platform that I talked about. And I'm going to just create an HTML5 canvas document. So if you've never used Flash before, and this is just a really basic overview of the workspace, you've got your stage, which is this big white block right here. This is like the square that shows up if you're publishing for Flash Player or Canvas. You can think of this as like the little window that you're looking into that all this stuff is happening in. Down here in your timeline, this is of course where you manage your different layers. So similar to Photoshop or other applications, you can have many layers, and anything that you have on, say, layer 3 is going to overlap anything you have on layer 1. One of the important concepts to know about when you're working with Flash Professional and animating with Flash Professional is it's always a good idea to keep different pieces of animated content on their own separate layers, because things are sort of animated on the layer. So if you have like a ball, and I'm going to do a simple shape tween here. So going over to frame 40, you'll notice that Flash Professional, these are all frames. So it's not time like it is in like Premiere, Premiere or After Effects. It's frames based. But you do get the time down here. So right now my animation is 0 seconds long because I only have this one frame. However, if I go and insert more frames, so if I say insert timeline frame, you can see it extends all those frames, and now my circle exists across all those frames. And down here, I can see that it's 1.6 seconds in length. And you might be like, well, it says 40 frames. How does that translate into 1.6 seconds in length? How do you even calculate that? So you do that in the properties panel over here, where you've got a frames per second. So if it's 24 frames per second, then of course you do some math and come out with 1.6. Right. You can also change the stage color here. I always change it because I think white's really glaring when I'm looking at a computer screen. You can change the stage width and height, and you can actually scale content along with the stage. So what this does, and this is new, like if you create this whole animation with all these all these painstakingly animated assets and their size just right and everything, and then the client comes back and is like, oh no, we need this at like, this size instead, or this resolution. Like you used to have to basically redo the whole stupid thing over. Now you can just say, all right, I want to scale my content. You can change the size of your stage. So I'll pull it down to like 244. And you'll notice like everything on the stage actually scales down with that. It's something that Flash has needed for so long. And it's great to see that it's finally there. So if we wanted to do like the simplest animation possible, we could just use a shape, which I've already drawn on the stage here, and create a shape tween. But before I do that, let's actually make some adjustments here. So I've got a stroke and a fill, and you can see that right here. I'm going to choose a different color for my stroke so we can see it. So I'm choosing that green color. And you can make the stroke larger or smaller. And you can also describe the width profile of the stroke. So maybe I'll choose that width profile so you can see how that gets applied to it. You've got a little width tool here, which is kind of new. It's out now, but not a lot of people know about it, where you can tweak your stroke actually just on the object like that. So if you wanted some strange shape thing like that, yeah, that's kind of neat. You could actually save that as a new width profile. So width profile 1, I'll call this Boulder beam. And hit OK. So now if I wanted to, let's say, I'll go to a different layer and just draw out a stroke. So right now it's just taking the last one that I had selected there. But maybe I actually want Boulder beam. So if I choose that, that's what my stroke looks like. So what we can do is also access that brush library from here. So if I choose brush library, it comes up, and I get things like artistic brushes. So charcoal is pretty neat. I'll choose scribble. Then I've got this neat scribble guy here. And you can, of course, adjust his arc and so forth by using the tools. You've got a whole bevy of tools over here to actually create content and modify it. It would take an entire other session to go through them all. But there are many, many tools here. And going back to the animation part, so let's say we want to animate this shape. So what we need to do is create a shape tween. If I right-click on that frame span, so anywhere from frame 1 to 40, I get this menu where I can say, hey, I want to create a new shape tween because I'm using a basic shape. If I was using a different type of object, like a movie clip symbol instance, graphic symbol instance, I could create a motion tween or classic tween, which they all have slightly different properties, but we'll just do a simple shape tween. And you'll notice immediately what we get is a broken tween. So we've got this little dotted line and nothing happens, right? That's because when you're using a shape tween, you actually need to have more than one keyframe. If you look over here, we have a keyframe on frame 1, and you can tell that because the frame itself has a filled circle in it, whereas an empty keyframe, which is right above this, has a unfilled circle. So for a shape tween to work, we need to insert an additional keyframe somewhere else. So it's insert timeline keyframe. So you'll notice here that we get an additional keyframe, and now we've got our arrow, and it's a nice solid arrow. So it's not at all broken. However, we still don't have any animation going on because we haven't changed any of the properties of this thing. So let's grab that and move it over here. And maybe we'll use the free transform tool to make it bigger and rotate it a little. And then we get this interesting animation. So, and we can actually preview it here too if I just...
So the shape tween or the motion tween just describes what kind of animation you have between.
It's the kind of animation depending upon the type of object you're actually animating. So if you're using a basic shape like this, you're going to be using a shape tween. If you're using a more complex object, like a movie clip symbol instance or a graphic symbol instance, you would use a motion tween or a classic tween, because they both have like different aspects to them.
Well, and you might want to explain instances and symbols. So
yeah, so the way that works.
There's symbols in Illustrator, and that's just kind of flat like a JPEG.
So let's have a look at that. So if I create this shape right here, and I create that on a new layer, because you always should do that.
If you had a person and you wanted to animate the arms and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
would each body part be in a different layer?
Depends. If you are doing it as like a normal motion tween or classic tween or even a shape tween, then yes, they would all be on a separate layer. However, if you were using that IK, inverse kinematics, bone tool, armature type stuff, and armature is all kind of self-contained. So you wouldn't have to do that on a different layer. In that case, all of the different instances that made up that armature can exist on the same layer. That's like the one exception to this whole one layer, one item per layer, if animated rule that we have going on here.
I'm just picturing a background and a person in front, and there'd be so many layers, it'd be hard to keep up with them.
Yeah, and just like Photoshop or anything, it's important. Obviously, my layers are poorly named here. And it's the same thing with your library. So if you import bitmaps or create symbols, which we're going to do in a minute here, they go in your library. So if I say, select this thing, and I'm like, hey, I want to modify, convert to symbol, then I can actually choose, well, do I want to create a movie clip symbol, button symbol, or graphic symbol? And of course, they all have their own unique capabilities, right? But movie clip symbol is usually a good bet if you're creating any sort of symbol because it is the most diverse and most interactive. You can do the most with it. So I'll just call this shapes. I couldn't think of a good name. So you'll notice that immediately this movie clip symbol appears in my library. And I can pull out many instances of that symbol on my stage and do things to them, so change their properties. However, any of the properties of the symbol that I change on the stage do not affect the symbol that's in the library. What this means is if I go into the symbol itself to edit it by double-clicking, so now you can see up here I'm inside of that symbol. If I go ahead and change its color or something like that, like let's say it's blue color, because those instances are all instances of that one symbol, they all adopt any of the edits made to the symbol itself. However, you can change any of the properties of the instances and it won't change everything.
Can you import symbols that you make in Illustrator? Like if you want to build the shapes and stuff in Illustrator?
You can, it has a importer from Illustrator, like a special dialog that appears, where you can choose like artboards and things like that. But I don't think it has like a symbol conversion type thing.
Okay.
It might.
Save it to your save the symbol to your library.
Yeah, I don't have any Illustrator files on here.
I can check.
But yeah, so you can
export it from Illustrator.
What you would do is just you'd say like file, import. You can choose import to stage or library, and then you just point to an Illustrator file, just a .ai file. It'll bring it in. It'll give you a dialog with a bunch of different options, like, oh, do you want to import all the layers in Illustrator to layers in Photoshop? Do you want to do this or that? How do you want to handle text when it's imported? Do you want to keep it as text? Do you want to change it in outlines? All that stuff. I don't quite remember seeing anything about symbols, but it might be there somewhere. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't remember that. I don't know if they updated that or not.
Yeah, I mean, they changed the import dialogues for both Illustrator and Photoshop.
Is the Photoshop one better now? Like, do you remember it was good, and then they like took stuff out, and then
yeah, they changed them all when they got rid of the fireworks importer.
Well,
if I remember right.
Symbols library, right, for CC, so maybe you could save the symbols.
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, so for instance, yeah, these are a bunch of my different symbols here. So like this is a brush that I created for a project for Adobe that they didn't actually use the brush, but I still keep it for demonstration purposes. And you know, I can click on that and it applies it, and then I can change, you know, aspects of that brush and so forth. So yeah, if you can save it, if you can save something to your CC library, you might be able to bring it in here. However, there are certain things that can't come in. So it's all just colors generated. Should have some stuff. Brushes. Yeah, so here's one of my daughters. So you can bring in people, yeah. Oh, and it's got this stupid width thing on it. That's why nothing looks right. There we go. Yeah. So you can do stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, these things were all generated inside of Adobe Brush, right? So on the mobile app, then synced to my Creative Cloud and so forth. But yeah, because you can definitely create stuff inside of like Photoshop and Illustrator and say, yeah, I want this in my CC library. So depending on what it is, like I've noticed, like I know before you said you hadn't used Adobe Brush before, but like there's certain types of brushes you can create, and unfortunately, like when you create a brush, you have to pick what kind of brush you have. So any Illustrator brushes should work just fine in Flash Professional. However, brushes for Photoshop and for, I think it's called Photoshop Sketch. Is that the iOS app? Or maybe it's just called Sketch. I can't remember. But there's a couple of formats of brushes that don't work in Illustrator or Flash Professional.
Is that because they're rasterized?
It's like a different type of brush. Yeah. And I'm not sure exactly
like how they
what the difference is. Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah. I think it might be be just rasterized versus a vector type.
Yeah, but the one thing I'm wondering though about the Illustrator symbol is that I mean, if you have a symbol and it's made up of different layers and you can direct like things in it, I don't know what it does. I mean, I don't think it's going to preserve that for you. It probably won't, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if you could like either drop a symbol into an Illustrator document and try to bring that in, or like explode an Illustrator symbol in Illustrator, and then bring that like exploded symbol document in.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Can probably. I mean, you can bring it in and like remake it as a symbol, but I don't know that you're going to get everything as a symbol.
Yeah,
I don't know that for sure.
The symbols are certainly different, right?
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can figure out later.
But it's a similar idea. It's just I don't know that
yeah. But like symbols in here are like, you know, Flash's symbols are very specific things, right? So.
I'm gonna go run to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right back.
So yeah. So yeah, actually, I mean, is there anything else that you would want to see in Flash as a demo kind of thing, or anything I talked about? Or I know we're getting tight on the time here, so I could always just wrap up the presentation, and then if you have any questions afterwards, we could just talk, and or if you get an idea. So let's see if I can fidget with this again.
Well, you remember the stuff that you wanted to do before when you asked? So you could totally do it in Flash, and then there's different ways you could export it so that like what she was wanting to do before was have like something that would run on an iPad that people could use for like marketing stuff, right? So she'd like to be able to make something that they could run on their iPad. And so you could make whatever. I mean, you have actually a lot more latitude in it to make something.
What would the what would the thing that you'd be distributing be? Like what format would it be?
Well, I create interactive PDFs because that's the best method I've found that works.
Okay.
Where you can like click on things and it's kind of like an advanced PowerPoint presentation or something, basically.
Way more in Flash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah,
would have to
you used to be able.
The internet, like how would someone else run that? They would have to have internet access, right?
It depends on how it's delivered.
Yeah, whatever your delivery is. But are you making it available to everybody or just your salespeople?
It would be our salespeople.
So it's like a little local.
Yeah.
And it's on iPad.
A lot of them have iPads, but they would run it from the computer as well. Sometimes they don't have internet too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, PDF would work for that. Yeah. I'm trying to think because, like, I mean, you could certainly do like a little canvas-based thing, and they could just like run it in their browser or whatever. But
yeah, but if they don't have internet access,
yeah,
if you distribute it like wherever you do have access, and then it's just on their iPad, then they can take it anywhere. But you could do a lot more robust things. So I don't remember what it was. If it was product, was it a product that you were just like having
like services that they're selling?
Yeah. So you could have, I mean, you could do certain things in there where, I mean, interactive.
Yeah.
You have a lot more latitude.
Yeah, I should do some little demos on Melinda.com or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never opened it in my life, so it would be a lot of work to learn it, I think.
There are a lot of ideas to translate, though.
Yeah.
Things that you already know. That's
Yeah.
a nice thing. It's true.
Yeah, and PDFs, I'm not sure if they do anymore, but they used to have Flash Player built into them.
Yeah,
Or Acrobat had, or Reader had, or something.
Just a heads up that we've got about 15 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can actually make something in Flash and put it into your.
But I don't think that would probably
It's not
run
really
on.
helping.
I don't know if they still have that in all the different versions of like Reader that they distribute. Like they used to have it like built into Reader, but I don't know if they do that anymore. Like I never hear from like the Acrobat people or anything.
I'm gonna try it now and see. I can't see that.
Yeah. But anyway, here's just like takeaways for the thing, and obviously I'm not gonna go through and read them all, but I've got my contact information here too. So website, Twitter, blog, my Lynda stuff, my stuff on Amazon and so forth. So, you know, definitely Twitter's a good way to get in touch with me. I also have, like if I, wait. No, I meant that. You can also get to me at, I just realized my email isn't on there. Who uses email anymore? Yeah, so. Should I spell that right? Yeah. So, yeah, you can get with me through email as well.
Sorry to interrupt you guys. I just know you can't hear the announcements in here. I just want to make sure you're aware that you just have, about 5 minutes to finish up your meeting and we're closing.
Thanks.
Gotcha.
Thanks. Maybe we should keep the drawings.
Yeah, let's keep it.
All right, so that is the end of my presentation anyway. So thank you for coming. And
You're awesome.